All right, Flint and Steel lovers, we'll get right to the point. We've spent the last 2 years on a mission to find common plant tinder that can reliably catch a spark from a flint and steel, right there on the spot in the wild, without any charring. A mission that included experiments on 95 plants and 140 variations of those plants. And this is the first time we've featured all of our findings in one place. Every plant, every variation, even ranked in order according to their effectiveness. And the most exciting part is that most of these plants on this expansive list we've never seen mentioned in any discussion for flint and steel fire making ever. And we've certainly never seen most of these plants in any video demonstration. I mean, is it possible that there have always been multiple plants growing all around us in the wild that just haven't been tried? Or were tried but prepared wrong? Or were they just harvested in the wrong condition or the wrong season? Or maybe it was just the wrong part of the plant that was being tried. Well, we went on a quest for these answers, and you may want to lean in close because some of these plants might be growing right around you too, overlooked and underappreciated. But why this whole endeavor? Well, we had always been told that you must char or add ashes to your tinder first to reliably catch a spark from a flint and steel. Or in other words, you had to make a fire so you could make a fire. Yeah, maybe it was technically possible to do it with a couple uncharred plants and fungus, but the overall consensus was that it wasn't practical or reliable to find and use uncharred tinder out in the wild. In fact, many articles we studied through the years called it almost impossible. Well, we didn't like it, but we went along with that for so many years because we just didn't have any evidence or experience to the contrary. But now, after 2 years of extensive research and experimentation, we have both. Lots of both. Okay, enough build-up. Let's just see this list. All right, to rate these plant tinders, we had to come up with a 1 to 10 rating system, which we call the best condition rating, or BCR. This means that we are scoring each tinder based off of how reliable it is when it's in its absolute best possible condition. We also needed a top standard to measure against that could represent a 10, which we'll just consider char cloth. A 1 means it's technically possible because we've done it, but not at all dependable or anything we'd recommend. Now keep in mind these ratings may change over the years as our experience and knowledge changes, but for now, here are our ratings from our own experience.
That is amazing.
Starting with category 1, this is the poor group. These are 1s and 2s. Now we won't spend a lot of time here, but they gotta be mentioned because, well, they worked. Barely. We'll kick it off with mugwort leaves, harvested green and then dried. A BCR score of just 2. It took us 14 minutes of steady striking to get 1 spark to hold. But again, still good to know it's possible. Now don't get it in your mind that mugwort is bad overall. In fact, we made a whole video about how great it is for flint and steel. But this is one plant that should not be used green and dried. But stay tuned until the end of the video to get the full wrap on how it should be harvested and the crazy high score it received. Thimbleberry is another one that's just barely possible, but we could never recommend unless you have nothing else to work with. It got a BCR score of 2.5. All right, next up is dead winter stinging nettle. What a pain to get this stuff started. It also got a BCR score of 2, and it took 800 total strikes to make it work. So technically possible? Yeah. Recommended? No, never. Not unless you're desperate. We see wild cucumber growing all over the place. It's poisonous. Don't eat it. But go ahead and give it a try for flint and steel. Not that we're recommending it, but if you want to take on a challenge, hey, go for it. It got a score of only 2.5, but we did it. So there's one plant that gets an honorable mention in this poor category, and that's cattail down. It received a BCR score of 1. It barely even made this list because we know it's technically possible from having accomplished it 40 years ago using a hatchet, but after countless attempts to recreate it the past couple of years, we just couldn't get it to work. Okay, moving on to the fair group. These are 3s and 4s. Now these guys worked in a way that was repeatable, but not in a way that would give us confidence in a survival situation. We'll start with Russian sage. The dead flower heads from Russian sage get a BCR score of 3. It worked twice in the first 22 minutes, about 11 minutes for each success. Then it took another 30 minutes to get the next one. So 3 total successes in an hour. Good to know, but not what we'd call reliable. All right, we're moving on to rotted cottonwood bark. It got a BCR score of 3. Now, it should be noted here that the bark we used had been preserved in a covered shed for 15 years, and we still haven't been able to replicate this success out in the wild. But it's still noteworthy for education's sake that this is probably possible somewhere under some circumstance out in nature. Our next plant is called teasel. Now, dead teasel leaves get a BCR score of 4.5. Definitely not something we'd reach for first, but in a jam, we know we'd have a pretty good shot at getting it to work based off of our experience with it in the past. Oh, we really wanted to rank this next one higher just for sentimental reasons, but we can't allow ourselves to play favorites. Ocean spray is one of our all-time favorite shrubs for so many projects and tasks. We could go on and on about it, but for time's sake, we better just stay on topic and tell you that it only got a 4.5 BCR score. We used the light brown dead flowers and had just enough success with it to call it viable, but certainly not dependable. It needs to be noted that the dark brown flowers that have aged just a week or two longer produced no positive results. Dead leaves from a plant called Spirea earned another score of 4.5, and that rounds out the list for the fair category. Now on to the really exciting stuff. Everything you see from this point on we consider good or very good. This is the stuff we've had many successes with and can officially recommend. Presenting Category 3, the good group, 5s and 6s. Tinders that worked consistently and we do feel pretty confident with, but they still might take a little patience and stick-to-itiveness to have regular success. We'll start with Woodland Phacelia. This is a type of scorpion weed. BCR score of 5. Now, we used green, dried, bowl-ground leaves, which resulted in 2 embers, averaging 3 minutes and 7 seconds per ember. A quick note is that the dead leaves were even less effective, scoring a 4.5, which would bump them back down into the fair category. Now, just a quick warning, one account says that you can get a bad rash, almost like poison oak, if you get the oils from the leaves on you. We were working with dried leaves and experienced no ill effects, but you've been warned. Foxtail is a weedy grass that grows in the wild and also in my garden. It's always been a nuisance to me until now, but hey, it received a good BCR score of 5 when it was picked green and dried, so I'll look at it a little bit different from now on. Now, I can't even tell you how excited I was when I got the news that this next plant was successful. It's another nuisance of a weed. I mean, I really hated this plant. And honestly, I will forever hold a grudge against it for its pervasiveness on my home property. In fact, I remember thinking over the years, why does a plant like this even exist? What could it possibly be good for? Well, hearing that green, dried Canadian thistle leaves can be used for flint and steel fires finally answered that question. It got a BCR score of 5, and the dead leaves increased the score to 6.5. Well, you can see here that we aren't the only ones who love Queen Anne's lace, but I'm thinking we're probably the only ones who love it for its ability to catch sparks from a flint and steel. The BCR score for the dead leaves was a 5.
No way. No way.
Now, with a cool name like Pearly Everlasting, one should have a positive association with this plant, but I don't think most do for the same reasons as us. It got a BCR score of 5.5 using the dead flowers, while using the green dried leaves bumps it up to a 6. And we'll come back to this plant in just a bit. Until recently, I'd never heard of hedge nettle, but I hear that name all the time now in my family. I've even heard my kids talking about it around the house. And that's because we found that the leaves can be picked green, dried, processed, and catch a spark from a flint and steel, BCR score of 5.5. Now, the dead leaves work even better for sure, and they got a score of 6.5. There's a few variations of dock plants. For our experiments, we used broadleaf dock, and it did not disappoint. BCR score, 6.5. Okay, it's time to bring out the heavyweights. The next few plants scored between 7 and 8.5, which is in our very good range. These are plants that we always have success with, many times in under 10 strikes. Or in other words, since we've discovered each of these plants, there has never been a time that we couldn't get them to work when they were in their best possible condition. Wow, now that was quite a statement. Now let's break them down a bit. Category 4, the very good group. We'll start with stinging nettle. BCR score of 7.5, but this is not winter nettle. This is late spring through early fall stinging nettle, either picked green and then fibers peeled after drying, or fibers peeled right off the stalk and then dried. This stuff can be used within only a couple hours of harvest if it's been dried well enough. We've made several videos now demonstrating this, so if you want a deeper dive, you can check those out. And I better get off the topic of stinging nettle or this is going to turn into an hour-long video. It's that great. Pacific waterleaf is an all-time favorite of ours. The green leaves picked and dried get a BCR score of 7.5. It's one of the original big three that really got our research going. The way we discovered it was pretty miraculous too, which you can see in our original Flint and Steel no char video. Now the leaves get an even higher score of 8.5 when they're collected and processed dead. Okay, we got to get back to Pearly Everlasting so we can point out that there is often a drastic difference in viability depending on what part of the plant you use and what the condition of the plant is at the time that you harvest it. In the case of Pearly, its BCR score jumps to 7.5 when the dead leaves are used versus the dead flowers, which only scored a 5. We had 10 consecutive successes with the dead leaves, averaging only 9.5 strikes each time. Now that is pretty impressive. Now there's a very high scoring plant that we don't want you to use. Now that'll make sense in just a second because we're talking about Trillium. We need to let you know that this is an endangered plant where we live. We only know its effectiveness for flint and steel fires by picking leaves from Trillium plants on our own property that were in the process of dying or already dead, which we theorize may have increased the nitrate content and made them more flammable. We got them to ignite in only 6 strikes, so they get a BCR score of 8, but this bit of info we're sharing is just for education, and dead Trillium leaves are going to be pretty scarce out in nature anyway, so you're better off just enjoying this plant with your eyes. This is another unbelievable one that comes with a bit of a disclaimer. Stinging nettle dust, or what we call beetle dust, is the very fine powder that falls from decaying nettle, which has been degraded down by bugs like beetles. In our very first no char flint and steel video, we were pretty excited about the regular success we were getting with it, and while we're still excited about it, we have to make it clear that this dust is so incredibly hard to come by. At the time we discovered it, we didn't fully realize just how scarce it was because it needs to be cut first and then kept in a protected area and then exposed to bugs like beetles and such, and that's a pretty tall order to find in the wild. But notwithstanding, it's still got a high score because of how extremely flammable it is. But if you want it, you have to gather it way ahead of time and store them somewhere where the bugs will find them. Oh, great burdock. This was one of the original big three as well. But one of the things that always set it apart for us was how easy it is to collect, how common it is, and how well it holds together for different striking techniques. This is another pervasive plant that many people despise because of how prolific it is and how the sticky seeds cling to you, your animals, or seemingly anything that moves. And yet, I remember as a youth standing with my dad in our woods when one of the neighbor kids wandered over and started casually whacking at some burdock with a stick. My dad, politely, asked him to stop hurting the plant, and that was 30 years or more before we learned how valuable it even was. Well, we know the expression, what goes around comes around, and we're so glad burdock came back around to benefit us all these years later. It gets a BCR score of 8. All right, back to mugwort, but this time we're talking about the dead leaves that are either attached to the plant or have fallen beside it. These leaves are amazing. They get a BCR score of 8.5, which is the highest score on our list, rivaled by only dead waterleaf leaves, which also received that same score. So every once in a while, we get a comment from someone who tried one of our recommended tinders and they say something to the effect of, "This does not work." So what would we say to someone who watches this video, tries some of the tinders but is not successful? We would say, welcome to the No Char Flint and Steel Club. Using these plants won't guarantee your success. It takes practice and lots of failures to learn the nuances of each plant. Most of these plants, in fact, didn't work for us either at first. Sometimes it can just be a matter of technique, and other times it might just be a bad batch of tinder. We are so glad that we didn't quickly dismiss the plants on this list just because we experienced temporary lack of success. Because you can clearly see what we've been able to accomplish in 2 years, and it took a combination of knowledge, technique, persistence, and the right tinder harvested and processed the right way to have regular success with most of these. We're talking hundreds of thousands of strike attempts to learn the nuances of each plant. It involved failing forward over and over and over. So if you're new to Flint and Steel, don't compare your journey's beginning to our middle. It may take some practice like it did for us to make these tinders work consistently. But hopefully these videos we've done can speed up your journey. And I also have to add that this entire project has been one of the funnest and most exciting projects we've ever done, and you'll probably have the same experience as us. And if you need help along the way, let us know. We could talk Flint and Steel no char with you all day. We also did a deep dive into striking methods that you might enjoy. Also, we have several videos on nettle, waterleaf, and great burdock already made. You can see those links in the description, along with the highly requested PDF, which has a summary of all the content we covered here. In total, we were successful with 20 total plants and 30 variations of those plants. You might ask, why did we go so crazy over all this? Well, we did it for our own sake for sure, but also for the sake of the bushcraft, wilderness survival, fire-making community that we love. And we plan to keep growing this list for years to come. So what do you think of our research and findings? Let us know in the comments. Also, you can support what we're doing just by subscribing, sharing, and hitting the like button. Also, make sure you got the notifications turned on so you don't miss what's coming up, and we'll see you all in the next one.